Fiancé, Mark, thought he was marrying a quiet, soft-spoken accountant who'd done a routine desk job in the military. He thought I was easy to control, predictable, and weak. He had no idea that for 10 years, I served as a senior intelligence investigator attached to joint task forces, dismantling financial fraud and organized networks. When I walked back into our home to grab my military ID on the morning of our dress rehearsal, I caught him and his mother laughing in his study. Mark was detailing his exact plan to siphon my savings, place our future house under his name only, and strip me of everything the moment we said, "I do." They thought I was an easy mark. They had no idea I was trained to destroy people exactly like them. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Heather Morgan. I'm 35 years old, and if you saw me on the street, you'd probably think I was the most average, unassuming woman in the room. I work as a certified public accountant. I keep my voice low, and I never make a scene. When I met Mark 2 years ago, he saw exactly what I let him see: a gentle, quiet woman with a steady corporate job who had done a brief, routine stint in the military straight out of college. He always assumed I worked some safe, sleepy desk job behind a computer terminal, filing supply forms or answering phones. I never corrected him. What Mark didn't know, what no one in my civilian life knew, was that for 10 full years, I served as a senior intelligence investigator attached to joint task forces. My job wasn't filing paperwork. It was forensic financial intelligence, tracing hidden offshore accounts, tracking organized networks, and picking apart complex fraud schemes designed by people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. When I left active duty, I wanted peace. I wanted a predictable life, a loving home, and a partner to build a future with. So when Mark proposed, I thought I had finally found that calm after the storm. He was charismatic, attentive, and seemingly driven. But looking back, his subtle condescension was always there, hidden behind a smooth smile. He mistook my calm nature for submission, and my silence for weakness. He thought I was an easy target he could maneuver without a fight. He was dead wrong. The morning of our wedding dress rehearsal was supposed to be a whirlwind of excitement and final details. We were scheduled to meet our families at the venue by noon, but as I pulled out of the driveway, I realized I'd left my military ID card on my office desk, a document I needed for our upcoming honeymoon travel arrangements. I turned the car around, parked down the street, and let myself into the house through the side door, stepping quietly onto the hardwood floors so I wouldn't disturb Mark if he was on a call. As I approached the hallway leading to his private study, I heard voices. Mark's home office door was cracked open, and the sound of muffled laughter echoed into the corridor. I paused, recognizing the sharp, elevated tone of his mother, Eleanor. "Are you absolutely certain she won't notice the clause in the revised title deeds, Mark?" Eleanor asked, her voice dripping with calculated arrogance. "Mother, relax," Mark replied with a cold, dismissive chuckle. "Heather doesn't look at anything beyond basic spreadsheets. She trusts me completely. Once the wedding is finalized on Saturday, all her premarital savings and the inheritance from her late uncle get merged into the joint venture account. I've already set up the transfer authorization under the new estate plan." "And the house in Oak Ridge?" Eleanor pressed. "The moment her funds clear to pay off my business line of credit, I'm shifting the property title solely into my name under the corporate LLC," Mark explained smoothly. "If she ever figures it out and tries to walk, she walks away with nothing. She's too passive to fight back anyway. She's just a soft-spoken accountant who sits quietly and does what she's told." I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand resting against the cold wall. Every drop of warmth drained from my chest, replaced by a crystal-clear, icy reality. For a brief second, a sharp, stinging betrayal hit my chest, but almost instantly, My military training took over, wiping away the emotion and replacing it with pure, cold calculation. In high-stakes intelligence, panic gets you killed. Focus keeps you alive. I didn't push open the door. I didn't scream or throw a scene. Instead, I quietly stepped back down the hallway, slipped out the side door, and gently closed it behind me. Sitting in my car down the street, my mind shifted straight into investigator mode. Mark thought he was a mastermind, but to a trained eye, his behavior suddenly made perfect sense. The sudden urgency to merge our bank accounts before the wedding, his insistence on handling all the legal estate paperwork himself, and the subtle pressure to sign documents quickly under the guise of pre-wedding stress. He wasn't just being greedy, he was desperate. I pulled up my laptop, connected to a secure network, and ran a preliminary sweep on his business registrations and personal credit filings. Within minutes, my suspicions were confirmed. Mark was drowning in hidden debts, leveraged up to his neck with high-interest business loans and failed investments he'd concealed under shell companies. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a bailout funded by my life savings. He expected an easy, passive Mark who would sign her life away with a smile. Instead, he was about to get a full-scale, covert investigation. I put the car in drive and headed toward the rehearsal venue, wearing the same quiet smile he thought he controlled. Over the next 48 hours, I worked with the speed and precision of a military operation. While Mark was busy admiring himself in his tuxedo and double-checking the rehearsal dinner guest list, I spent every night in my home office dissecting his financial life line by line. Using my forensic accounting background, I traced the paper trail Mark thought he'd hidden behind layered LLCs and offshore shell accounts. What I found was even worse than I anticipated. Mark hadn't just made bad investments, he had taken out fraudulent business loans using forged signatures from his former business partners. He was sitting on over $400,000 in immediate, pressuring debt. His entire plan hinged on getting my signature on those standard estate documents at the rehearsal dinner, which would give him power of attorney and allow him to liquidate my inheritance to satisfy his creditors before the banks moved in. Instead of panicking, I picked up the phone and called Major Thomas, a former intelligence legal officer I'd served with for 6 years and one of the sharpest corporate attorneys in the state. I laid out the entire paper trail, the bank statements, the audio recording I'd discreetly captured on my phone during my second walk through the house, and the loan documents. Thomas listened in silence before letting out a low whistle. "Heather, this isn't just a dirty divorce or a bad breakup," he said. "This is felony financial fraud and attempted grand larceny." Together, we drafted a fresh set of legal documents. On the surface, they looked like standard pre-nuptial and asset protection agreements for a high-net-worth marriage. In reality, they were legally binding disclosures that laid out his exact debt obligations, stripped him of any access to my assets, and trapped him into acknowledging his corporate liabilities under penalty of perjury. The trap was set. The rehearsal dinner was held at an opulent downtown restaurant, paid for entirely with my credit card under the promise that Mark would reimburse me after the wedding. Mark and his mother, Eleanor, moved through the room like royalty, boasting to our 60 guests, which included my family, his high-profile business associates, and several local investors, about the grand future ahead. As the main course was cleared, Mark stood up, tapping his champagne glass with a silver spoon. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," he said, beaming with smooth confidence. "Before we celebrate tomorrow, Heather and I have one quick administrative task. As part of our joint estate planning, we're signing our final union documents tonight." Eleanor slid a leather-bound folder across the table toward me, accompanied by a sleek gold pen. "Just sign on the highlighted lines, dear," she whispered, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "It's just routine paperwork to make sure everything is seamless for tomorrow." I looked down at the folder. It was the fraudulent power of attorney and asset transfer contract Mark had prepared. I didn't pick up the pen. Instead, I stood up, reached into my blazer, and pulled out a stack of sleek, crimson-bound folders. "You're absolutely right, Mark," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "Transparency is essential before a wedding, but before I sign yours, I think our guests, especially your investors, should review these." I handed the folders to his primary business partners and the lead investor sitting at the head table. Mark's confident smile faltered. "Heather, what is this? What are you doing?" "These are the certified forensic accounting audits of your company," I said calmly, "along with the complete transcripts of your hidden $400,000 debt, your forged loan applications, and the exact recording of you and your mother planning to liquidate my life savings to cover your fraud." The room fell into dead, suffocating silence. Across the table, the lead investor flipped open the crimson folder, his eyes widening in shock as he scanned the bank statements and certified debt disclosures. Within seconds, low mutters swept through the high-profile guests, and the color completely drained from Mark's face. "What is the meaning of this?" Eleanor shrieked, slamming her hands on the table as she stood up. "This is outrageous. Mark, tell them she's lying. She's just a confused, low-level military clerk who doesn't understand business." I turned my eyes toward her, using the exact commanding, icy presence I'd honed through a decade of high-stakes interrogations. "I wasn't a clerk, Eleanor," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I was a senior intelligence investigator for Joint Federal Task Forces. For 10 years, my sole job was dismantling corporate fraud, organized financial networks, and men who thought they could manipulate the system." Mark stumbled backward, gripping the edge of his chair as his smooth facade completely shattered. "Heather, please. We can talk about this in private," he stammered, his voice trembling as sweat beaded on his forehead. "You're ruining everything. You ruined yourself the moment you mistook my quiet nature for weakness," I replied coldly. "I didn't come here to sign your fraudulent papers. I came to deliver mine." At that exact moment, the heavy double doors of the private dining room opened. Major Thomas walked in, flanked by 2 uniformed investigators from the State Financial Crimes Division. Thomas stepped forward, placing a thick stack of formal legal summonses directly in front of Mark. "Mark Miller," Thomas announced loudly, his voice echoing across the silent hall. "You are officially served with federal freeze orders on all corporate accounts, alongside a formal investigation into wire fraud, grand larceny, and bank forgery." Mark sank into his chair, completely broken, staring at me as if he were seeing a total stranger. He hadn't just lost my money and the wedding. He was facing complete financial ruin and years behind bars. The wedding was canceled that very night, but for me, it felt like the beginning of my real freedom. Mark's corporate accounts were frozen immediately, and within 3 months, his firm collapsed under the weight of federal fraud charges and civil lawsuits from his investors. Eleanor had to sell her own home just to cover Mark's mounting legal defense fees, leaving them both facing the exact financial ruin they had tried to inflict on me. As for me, I sold my house, packed up my quiet life, and moved to a beautiful coastal town. I opened my own independent financial consulting firm, using my skills to help small business owners and vulnerable individuals protect their assets from predatory schemers. Looking back, I realized that Mark's biggest mistake wasn't just his greed. It was assuming that my calm composure and soft-spoken nature meant I lacked strength. He thought my silence was vulnerability, never realizing it was simply the quiet before the storm. People often think that strength is about being loud, aggressive, or demanding. But true power is sitting back, observing, and letting your actions speak when the time is right. I lived my life on my own terms, stronger, wiser, and completely in control of my future. What would you have done if you overheard your fiancé's real plan just before your wedding day? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.